Mr. President, this is a time of extraordinary crisis for our nation. In this time of crisis, I call upon each of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to rise above. Rise above petty partisanship. Rise above the bickering that so often consumes Washington. Rise above and put first the priorities of the millions of Americans who are hurting. Look, there is a time for political disagreements. There's a time for policy disagreements. I am no stranger to robust political and policy disagreements. But we are in the midst of a global pandemic. People are dying. People are suffering. Last night, when this Senate voted on whether to move forward with emergency relief legislation for the millions of people being devastated by the economic disaster we're seeing as a result of the coronavirus epidemic, every single Democrat in this body voted to block consideration of this bill. Now, for those of you at home who are not poring over a Senate procedural matter, what does it mean to vote to block consideration? It doesn't mean they voted against the bill. It means they voted against even starting to take it up. The New York Times headline moments afterwards said, Democrats block $1.7 trillion stimulus bill. Of course, that headline had the fault of being accurate. And so within minutes, the New York Times changed it to Democrats block $1.7 trillion stimulus bill, citing worker concerns. That was headline number 2. But then apparently the partisan leanings in the New York Times were too strong for that. And so they revised it a third time to say partisan division halts discussion of the bill. No, it wasn't partisan division. It was one party, the Democratic Party, saying to this chamber and the American people, hell no. We won't even take this up and discuss it. At a time of crisis, at a time when people are dying, that's wrong. That's shameful. When we awakened this morning, following the Democrats' obstruction, worldwide, there were 372,563 reported cases of the coronavirus. In the hours since then, just today, there have been an additional 23,352 cases reported today. While the Democrats are blocking the bill, 23,000 new cases today. In the United States, when we started this morning, there were 35,224 cases this morning. Right now, as of the latest numbers, there are 41,708 cases in the United States today. That means we've had an additional 6,484 cases today while the Democrats are blockading. And by the way, where are the Democrats? C-SPAN doesn't show this whole chamber often, but it'd be nice if they did, because that entire side of the chamber is empty. They're not showing up for work. They're not doing their job. In Texas this morning, there had been 668 cases. As of right now, there's 722, 54 more cases today, while the Democrats are blocking consideration of this bill. How about deaths? Look, as we look at this crisis, there are people right now gasping for breath. You and I, we have friends who have been diagnosed with this disease. We've read stories, we've talked to people who've struggled under it. I heard from one individual who's hospitalized right now that breathing felt like a belt strapped across his chest, that he could barely breathe. As of this morning, worldwide, there had been 16,381 deaths. Now that's the number now. This morning it was only 15,308. That means today while the Democrats have been blocking this bill, 1,073 additional people died. In the United States, as of this morning, there were 471 deaths reported due to coronavirus. As of right now, it's 573. That means today, 102 Americans died, while the Democrats were blocking consideration of this bill. In Texas, as of this morning, there had been 8 deaths. Now, there are 9. 1 Texan died, while half this chamber refused to show up and do their job. Now, this morning, when we voted again, we saw the first signs of cracks as one Democrat, senator from Alabama, who had voted no yesterday, decided this morning, well, maybe we should take up the bill. One Democrat. Where are the rest? There are a lot of Democrats who like to hold themselves out as moderate Democrats. Where are they? Right now, what the Democratic leadership is doing is they're playing games. They're playing games in a way that is irresponsible. Listen, this bill has a lot of important elements for a lot of people that are hurting. You've got not only the people who are hospitalized, the people who are suffering, but you've also got economic devastation, as we have much of this country has ground to a halt. We've got people who work in restaurants, waiters, waitresses, bellboys, who haven't gone to work in over a week. We have people in hotels. I've spoken to business owner after business owner after business owner for the last week. One hotel owner described how he currently had 6% occupancy rates. You can't keep a hotel running with 6% occupancy rates. I talked to one hotel owner who described how he had made 5,000 layoffs in the last week. Another hotel owner had made 6,000 layoffs in the past week. I talked to an oil and gas business owner who'd laid off 5,000 workers in the past week. I talked to another oil and gas business owner who'd laid off 5,000 workers in the last week. You know, today I'm thinking about people like my friends at Republic Country Club. Now, Republic Country Club is a bit of a misnomer. It's a barbecue joint outside of Houston. It's owned by my friend Michael Berry. It is often the venue for country western concerts. It's a venue sometimes for comedy shows. I went and took my dad to Larry the Cable Guy at Republic Country Club. I've had multiple election night parties at Republic Country Club. It's a big old honky-tonk. You've never seen so many confused national reporters as they walked in and looked around and didn't know what to make of the place. Father's Day, a year ago, I did a Father's Day party at Republic Country Club. My dad, we roasted up 2 whole pigs. Cook staff at the barbecue place, they made them up, and we had a big party, invited people there. It's a Cuban tradition to roast a whole pig. Now, why am I telling you about Republic Country Club? Because yesterday, which happened to be my father's 81st birthday, yesterday Republic Country Club announced they're closing their doors. Yesterday, Michael Berry sent out a tweet telling first responders, telling police officers and firefighters and everyone on the front line, he said, drive by Republic Country Club today, March 23rd. Drive by during the day, we'll give you a free barbecue. We're going to cook everything we have. We're just going to give it away in to-go. You can't come in, but we're going to give you to-go boxes. And he went on to say, they're emptying out all the liquor from the storeroom, and from behind the bar, they're giving it to the employees because the employees are all being laid off. And he said he doesn't know if they'll open again. Now, I'll tell you, those employees, the bartenders, the bouncers, many of them are veterans. Many of them are big guys covered with tats. They're salt of the earth. And right now, they don't know where their rent check is coming from next week. That's happening all across this country. That's happening not just at one barbecue place in Houston. That's happening at bars. It's happening at nail salons. It's happening at movie theaters. You know, I love Sunday night to go with a buddy of mine and go watch a movie. Movie theaters are shut down all over this country. Retail stores. People laid off. Nobody's going to the mall right now. And for the people who are hurting, they're scared. They don't know, number one, if they're going to get sick. But number two, they don't know how they're going to make ends meet. This is a time of crisis, and we ought to be coming together. Now listen, this bill that we were moving to, I don't necessarily agree with every word of it. But there are a number of elements in this bill that are designed to provide real help to people who are hurting. One element of this bill is to give cash, an immediate check for $1,200 to every person in this country, every adult in this country earning under $75,000 a year. $2,400 for every couple earning under $150,000 a year, plus $500 for every child they've got. Now, you want to talk about real relief. For people that are scared, they're saying, what do I do next? Those are checks that are coming in the mail. And what have the Democrats said? No, halt the checks. Right now, those checks aren't coming, and they aren't coming for one reason, because the Senate Democrats are blocking taking up that bill. In many circumstances, that would not be the right policy outcome to just send checks to people. But at a time of crisis, where you need people just to be able to make it to tomorrow, putting some resources in their hands makes a big difference. Another element of this bill that is being blocked by Senate Democrats is $350 billion in emergency loans to small businesses like Republic Country Club, to small businesses like restaurants and bars, to small businesses like nail salons and barber shops and movie theaters and dress shops and hardware stores. Small businesses that are right now putting up the sign saying closed for coronavirus. Now, those emergency loans are designed to be given with the condition that they keep their employees on payroll. A lot of these small business owners want to keep their employees on payroll, but they don't have the cash. Under the terms of this bill, those loans are forgiven if they keep their employees on payroll. By the way, the Democratic talking point is, oh, this is just cash to businesses. Tell that to the owner of the barbershop, who takes an emergency loan to not fire all of her employees. That loan, under the terms of it's forgiven if the employees stay on the payroll. The Democrats are blocking that right now. What about unemployment insurance? The job numbers coming out shortly, I expect to be massive in terms of the job losses. I think we'll see north of 2-3 million people who've lost their jobs, and the numbers are getting worse. Every phone call I have is with more and more people that are losing their jobs. It is bad. It will come back, but it is bad right now. We need emergency support to get people through this dark time. This bill had $250 billion for additional unemployment insurance. What did that mean? That's an additional $600 per week for an additional 13 weeks. If you're one of the waitresses right now who's just been told your job's gone away and you apply for unemployment insurance, if this bill passes, you get an extra $600 immediately. But you know what? You don't right now, because Senate Democrats are blocking this. Now, if they have reasonable concerns, they're welcome to raise them. And by the way, this bill was drafted with the participation of nearly a dozen Senate Democrats who were actively part of the task forces submitting suggestions. In fact, one of the suggestions the Democrats submitted during the drafting was plus up those unemployment insurance numbers. And they got agreement. This was drafted in a bipartisan manner, but what happened? I got to tell you, yesterday, Sunday, most of us thought we were going to move to this. But then Nancy Pelosi decided it was time to play politics. Decided to throw a grenade into the whole process. And she had a list of demands, an over 1,000-page bill that she drops out of nowhere. And the demands she's pushing, I ask you, do these have anything to do with the coronavirus epidemic? A number of people have cited the famed quote from Rahm Emanuel, who's President Obama's chief of staff, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Sadly, we're seeing the embodiment of that cynical approach right now. Because all the people out of jobs the Democrats are using to push, what are they pushing for? Changing the emission standards on airplanes. Mr. President, what the hell do the emission standards on airplanes have to do with thousands of people dying and millions of people out of work in the coronavirus epidemic? Don't treat this bill like a partisan Christmas list. And by the way, you know, Republicans, we've got things we would like to advance too. Things I believe in deeply. You want to talk about what I'd like to do? I'd like to abolish the IRS. I've campaigned on that all over the country. I'm going to continue fighting for that. But, Mr. President, I'm not standing here with an amendment saying, as part of this emergency relief, let's abolish the IRS. There's a place for that political and policy discussion. The Democrats are pushing wind and solar tax credits. Mr. President, what in the hell does a windmill have to do with this crisis? Other than there's some Democratic lobbyists getting fat and rich, and they're willing to extort a crisis to try to advance their political agenda. Mandates on corporate board diversity. So these are Democrats that want to social engineer. Now listen, I actually have a lot of problems with corporate boards. I think we have far too many corporate boards that are docile and do what management wants. That's a serious problem. A lot of discussion about stock buybacks. I'll tell you what I get concerned about stock buybacks is when you have compensation agreements in place that the executives get rich if they get a short-term boost in share price, and it ends up hurting the shareholders. So I'd love to see actually more vigorous boards of directors that make sure that you're not creating incentives to game the stock price. That's a reasonable question. But they want to mandate effectively quotas on boards of directors. Mr. President, what in the hell does that have to do with this crisis? The Pelosi wish list wants to restructure the debt for the post office. Mr. President, last I checked, look, our postal workers, they go through wind and rain and snow, but they haven't been laid off. I call upon both sides. Don't play games with this. This crisis isn't going to end tomorrow. It's not going to end the next day. It's going to last for a considerable time. It's going to require adults to step up and lead. On the pandemic, we need to follow the science. We need to listen to the doctors. We need to listen to the physicians. We need to do the steps that we're taking to keep people safe. On the economy, we need to give immediate relief to people who are hurting, and we need to make sure a liquidity crisis doesn't become a solvency crisis. You know, it's interesting. Many of the Democrats are saying they don't want corporate bailouts. Well, listen, I agree with them. I am passionately opposed to corporate bailouts. One of the things I was gratefully relieved about how this bill was structured is that it's structured as loans and not condition-free grants. And it's structured primarily so that it's not picking favored companies that happen to have big lobbying presence in Washington. What does it mean to not have a liquidity crisis become a solvency crisis? Let's take, for example, the airlines. I've spoken with just about every major airline CEO in the past 2 weeks. The airlines are losing billions of dollars every month. Now, they didn't cause that problem. Unlike the financial crisis in 2008, this crisis was not caused by misconduct of one industry or another. This pandemic wasn't caused. It's not the airline's fault that the federal government has shut down flights to Asia and to Europe. That's not their fault. It's not the owner of the restaurant in downtown Houston's fault that the city of Houston has shut down the restaurant. That's not that small business owner's fault. Now, what we don't want is when the bills come due for all of those businesses, for them to have to sell their assets at a fire sale. We don't want the restaurant owner who has a pizzeria who saved to buy this fantastic pizza oven to have to sell the pizza oven for pennies on the dollar because the liquidity crisis has become a solvency crisis. We don't want our U.S. airlines to have to put up a garage sale effectively to sell all their airplanes because they're going bankrupt in the midst of a crisis. We want to come out of this with strong, robust commercial airline sector. We want to come back out of this with the small businesses thriving. We want to come out of this with a thriving energy sector. We want to come out of this with jobs. And so, Mr. President, I'm going to close this the way I started, by calling on Democrats, calling on Republicans, rise above petty partisan games. The Democratic leaders are playing these games. To every one of you Democrats, listen to the men and women in your states. Don't give in to the games. You know, most of the Democratic senators say they don't even know what their side wants, that it's just their leadership that's willing to hold the American people hostage for unrelated political partisan objectives. And by the way, one of the reasons I think Senate Democrats are so willing to engage in this is they expect the media to be utterly complicit in their cynical gamesmanship. So we stand here this afternoon, it is not only the Democratic side of the chamber that is empty, but as I look up to the press, nobody's there. There's not a single reporter sitting in the chamber. We've seen the New York Times. Actually, there's nobody sitting in the chamber, so they may have closed the chamber, in which case that may have been an unfair assault. But it's not an unfair assault to say the New York Times is changing their headline to give political cover for the games of the Senate Democrats. This is a time of crisis. It's not a time to play games. It's a time to rise above. It's a time to stand for the American men and women. It's a time to stand for jobs. It's a time to help protect people's lives. Mr. President, I yield the floor.